Hi, and welcome to Food with the Rumseys. I am David Rumsey, and today we are going to be making some French-style bread. This is actually a very simple recipe, great one to start with if you've never made bread before. It just takes a long time. Each step is very short, but we need to reserve a long day for us to go through it. So there are actually just 4 ingredients. You need bread flour. Now you can use all-purpose flour, but I find that bread flour works the best. It has a higher gluten content, which is going to make a nicer texture bread for you. And then we need salt here. This is just regular salt. We're going to need yeast. Now, this one says, if you zoom in on it, this says it's active yeast. Actually, this is instant yeast here. We use this as just a way to store our yeast. We buy our yeast by the pound, and then we store small amounts in the fridge. So this is just an old jar that we store yeast in. As a side note, you can use instant or active yeast. It doesn't really matter. In another video, I'll explain the difference between those. And then we need water, and we're going to use 1 cup of water. And then that is it that we are going to need for this recipe. Now we are going to, I have a couple, dishes here. I like to make it so I'm going to make my sponge, which is, we'll talk about what that is. I use a sponge method. I'm going to make it in this little container here. Then once that's risen, we're going to put the dough to rise in here. And then I use this bowl over here just to mix it. And that's just so that I don't mess up my counter. You can use your counter, but then you have more flour to clean up and everything. All right, so let's get going here. So we're going to start with a cup of flour. Now that might not be enough. You might need anywhere from a cup to a cup and a half of flour, maybe even a little bit more. Some of it depends on the grind of your of your flour. If it's a really fine ground flour, you might need more than a cup. If it's coarser ground, a cup might be enough. So I'm putting a cup of flour in there. I'm dumping my cup of water in here, and it's just cold tap water. You'll see a lot of recipes calling for warm water for breads. I don't like using warm water. One is that if your water is too warm, and it doesn't even have to be that warm, yeast starts to die at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, you will kill all the yeast. So I just like using cold tap water. You also see other recipes saying you have to dissolve your yeast in the water first, and and let it proof first. You don't have to do that with instant yeast or active dry yeast. That's one way you can check to see if your yeast is good or not, but it's not necessary to do. So I put in 1.5 teaspoons of yeast in there. I'm just going to take my trusty egg whisk and then whisk this together. Now I made this the other day, so I already know that I'm not going to have enough flour in here because what I'm looking for is a thick pancake batter, and you can see this is not like a thick batter at all. So I know I'm going to need to add some more flour, and this is where a lot of times with bread making, I find that the measurements aren't so much important. It's really the feel of the dough that is important. And so I'm going to just not even really measure. I'm just going to add in and dump some on the counter, because that's good. Add a little bit more flour in. Whisk this together. And you can see it's starting to thicken up. That's still just a tiny bit too thin for me. I want it to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to add in just a tiny bit more flour here. You want to be careful not to add too much flour in, although if you do, you can always just add a tiny bit more water in to kind of get it balanced to the right thickness. Now this isn't precise. I mean, if you don't have the exact thickness as mine, it's not really going to make much difference. So I'm going to whisk this again, and I think I'm kind of right there. You see how that's just kind of a nice, thick, almost pancake battery consistency, where it's just slowly falling down. That's the consistency we're looking for. And so I'm just going to whisk this together a little bit more. And then I'm going to tap off my whisk. Now, one thing that I always want to make sure to do is you want to wash this first. And the reason being is that if you forget to wash this off and that flour and water mixture dries on your whisk, it's a pain to get it off. It becomes crusty and hard and just a pain to get off. your whisk. And so that's pretty much it for the first step here. We have this, our starter here, and we are going to let this sit for at least 3 hours. You can do it maybe a little bit less. I've let it go even for 4.5 hours before, and it's fine. But what you're going to want to see here, I'm going to turn it here. This is about right here, the dough level. It should come up about triple in size. Might not be exactly, but it will be triple in size. Now what I'm going to do though is I don't want to just leave it exposed to the air like that. Some people insist that you put cling wrap on it. You can if you want to, not necessary. I just put a nice little tea towel on it, set it to the side, and then the magic of videos, 3 hours is going to elapse, and we're going to have what it looks like after 3 hours here.